structure.
Yeah. So maybe first we could just kind of step back and talk about why structure is so important in the first place. Like, why is it more than just, making sure your chapters are in the right order?
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever started reading a book and just felt completely lost, wandering around in a maze?
Oh gosh, all the time. Especially with some of those like really complex sci-fi novels where the timeline jumps all over the place.
Exactly. And that's often a sign of poor structure. A well-structured book, on the other hand, it acts as a guide. It leads the reader through the story or the information and makes it both engaging and impactful.
Okay, so structure is kind of a secret code that unlocks the book's full potential.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Gotcha. So whether you're writing a thriller, a romance, or even a self-help book, you need that solid work.
Absolutely.
So then how do we actually approach structuring for different genres? I mean, like, I get that a fantasy epic is going to need a different structure than, say, a guide to personal finance.
Right, and that's where Malala Media Publications comes in. They offer some really helpful insights. So, like fiction, one of the classic approaches is the three-act structure.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You set the scene in Act 1, build conflict in Act 2, and then reach the resolution in Act 3.
So it's kind of like a roller coaster.
Exactly. A slow climb, a drop, and then that feeling of like exhilaration as it comes to a stop.
Love that analogy. But I've also heard writers talk about things like the Save the Cat beat sheet. Is that something totally?
Not entirely. Save the Cat is just a more detailed breakdown of story beats focusing on 15 key points to keep readers engaged.
15 key points.
Yeah.
That's pretty specific.
It is. But it can be a really useful tool for plotting out your story.
Okay. So are you saying that, like, every successful novel has to follow the frameworks? Like, what about those books that break the mold and still manage to totally captivate readers?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are definitely books out there that break the mold. But even when they do, there's usually some kind of underlying structure at play, even if it's not super obvious.
So it's like jazz music. You have the basic chords and scales, but then the real magic comes from improvisation.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And what about nonfiction? Like, how do we approach structure when we're dealing with, facts and information instead of like fictional narratives?
Well, in nonfiction, shifts from creating a narrative arc to building a logical and engaging presentation of information.
Right. So instead of like plot twists and cliffhangers, we're thinking about organizing chapters and presenting evidence.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some of the key strategies for structuring nonfiction?
Well, Malala Media Publications highlights a few different approaches. One effective technique is to structure your book around your core message.
Like having that one central idea that everything else revolves around.
Right. Like in Atomic Habits by James Clear, the whole book is built around the idea of building small, sustainable habits.
Oh, yeah. Atomic Habits is a great example. Now that you mention it, I can totally see how that central message acts as a kind of anchor for the whole book.
Exactly. Another effective technique is to structure your chapters around reader questions or problems. Think about Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Workweek.
Ooh, that's a good one. Each chapter tackles a specific challenge related to like productivity or escaping the 9-to-5 grind.
Right. So you're essentially offering solutions to the reader's pain points, which automatically makes the information more engaging and relevant.
Makes total sense. So we're writing fiction or nonfiction, we need to keep our readers in mind.
Always.
So I have a confession to make. When I think about nonfiction, I sometimes worry about it becoming like dry or textbooky.
Yeah, I get that.
Is there a way to like bring in elements of storytelling to make it more captivating, even when we're dealing with like facts and figures?
Absolutely. In fact, storytelling is just as important in nonfiction as it is in fiction, maybe even more so. It's all about finding ways to make the information come alive, to make it resonate with readers on an emotional level.
Wait, storytelling in nonfiction? This I got to hear more about.
It's all about using those narrative techniques we love in fiction to make information more engaging.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. Like, what kind of techniques are we talking about here?
Well, one powerful technique is to start each chapter with a hook.
A hook. Like a compelling anecdote or a surprising statistic.
Exactly. Think about Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. He opens the book with the story of Roseto, this Italian-American town where people lived unusually long lives.
Right. And immediately you're like, wait, what's going on here? I need to know more.
Exactly. And it's not just about starting with a story. You can weave narratives throughout your nonfiction book to illustrate concepts, make complex ideas more relatable, even create emotional connections with your readers.
So it's like we're using stories as little bridges to help readers get one step to the next.
Exactly. I actually want to pause here for a second and get our listeners involved.
Ooh, I love when we get interactive. What you got in mind?
We've been talking about books that hook you from the start, right?
Mhm.
So I'm curious to hear from our listeners, what are some books that really grabbed your attention right away?
Yeah, what were those opening lines or those stories or those statistics that just made you want to keep reading? Head down to the comment section and tell us all about it. We want to know what books hooked you and what techniques the authors used to pull you in.
We'll definitely be your responses and maybe even share some of our favorites in the next episode.
Absolutely. So listeners, don't be shy. Tell us what's got you hooked. And now let's get back to our conversation about storytelling in nonfiction.
So another really effective way to bring storytelling into nonfiction is by using reels.
Oh, yeah. Like using stories about actual people to illustrate a point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about Brene Brown's work on vulnerability. She could have just presented the research and the theories, but she doesn't. She brings it to life with personal stories and anecdotes.
Right. Which makes it so much more relatable.
Exactly. And it's not just about making it relatable. It's about creating emotional. When readers feel something, whether it's empathy, inspiration, they're way more likely to remember the information and actually act on it.
So it's like we're not just giving them information, we're giving them an experience.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about starting with a hook and using real-life examples. What are some storytelling strategies we can use in our nonfiction?
Well, one that Malala Media Publications really emphasizes is the power of ending chapters and even the entire book with a story.
How do we do that without just repeating what we've already said?
Well, think of it as showcasing the so what of your information.
Okay, so like not just summarizing the key points, but showing how those points can actually be applied in the real world.
Exactly. It could be a case study of someone who used the advice you're giving, or even just a hypothetical scenario that shows the potential outcomes.
This is like taking the reader on a journey from understanding to application.
Precisely.